8 mice, 4 males, 4 females. Placed inside a world with unlimited food, unlimited water, perfect temperature, no predators, no disease, no threats of any kind. 5 years later, every single one of them was dead, and not a single death had a medical explanation. This is Universe 25, and what happened inside it is one of the most uncomfortable things science has ever documented about what living things actually need to survive. In 1968, an American scientist named John Calhoun built what he called a paradise. The enclosure was 9 feet square, with apartments stacked along every wall, connected by mesh tunnels running floor to ceiling. Every feeder was full. Every water bottle was full. The nesting material was soft. The temperature never varied. The mice inside were the healthiest specimens from the breeding colony of the National Institutes of Health. Calhoun was not a random experimenter. He had spent his entire career obsessed with one specific question. What happens to a society when nothing is hard anymore? He had been chasing that answer for 2 decades. He had built 24 earlier versions of this experiment, in forests, in barns, in laboratory rooms. Rats, mice, different configurations, different sizes. And in every single one, he had watched the same pattern play out. Population explosion, violence, social collapse, extinction. Universe 25 was meant to be the definitive version, the clean experiment that produced an answer nobody could argue with. On day 1, he placed his 8 founders inside and closed the lid. For the first 104 days, almost nothing happened. The mice explored the space, learned the geography, worked out who slept where. Then the first litters arrived, and the population began to double every 55 days. By day 315, more than 600 mice were living inside the enclosure. They climbed over each other on the ramps, slept in piles, jostled for space in the upper apartments. And this is exactly the moment when everything began to fall apart. In a normal mouse colony, when the population grows past what the territory can support, the surplus animals leave. They find new ground somewhere else. Inside Universe 25, there was no somewhere else. The young males with no territory to claim and no role to fill began drifting into the center of the enclosure. Calhoun would stand above the pen for hours watching them do nothing. They had no fights to win, no females to court, nothing to defend. They were perfectly healthy, perfectly fed, and they had absolutely nothing to do. When one of these males was attacked, he would not fight back. He would absorb the damage, stand up, walk a few feet, and lie down again. But not every male went quiet. A second group formed at the same time, on the opposite extreme. They were frantic and indiscriminate. They moved faster than any other mice in the enclosure. They forced themselves into nests other males were defending. They ignored courtship rituals entirely. They could not be deterred even by violence. And in the worst pockets of the colony, behaviors began appearing that no functioning mouse society had ever produced before. The females responded with their own withdrawal. Those who could find no place in the social order climbed to the highest apartments and stayed there alone. They stopped interacting with males. They stopped reproducing. Calhoun also noticed something he called the behavioral sink. Even though food was equally available everywhere in the enclosure, the mice began compulsively crowding around a handful of specific feeders. They would not eat alone. The presence of other bodies had become so deeply wired into their feeding instinct that a full feeder with no one else at it was functionally useless to them. The crowding at a few stations became unbearable, while the rest of the enclosure sat nearly empty. And then the mothers who were still trying to raise pups began to fail in a much darker way. Defending a nest in that environment required constant vigilance. The males who had originally claimed territory grew exhausted from patrolling and stopped protecting their families. The mothers had to defend the nest alone while still nursing. They turned on their own young. They abandoned pups in scattered locations around the enclosure. Some forgot which pups were theirs. Others stopped recognizing them as their own entirely. And in the worst sections of the colony, mothers began eating their offspring. In some areas, fewer than 1 in 20 newborn mice survived to weaning. Calhoun wrote that by this point, the social fabric of the colony was effectively dead. The bodies were still alive. The structure that held them together as a species was not. The pups that did survive were raised by mothers who barely registered whether they lived. They had no model of what a functioning life in this place looked like, and when they grew up, they behaved like nothing Calhoun had ever documented. The males of this generation never fought. They never tried to mate. They never engaged in any social behavior at all. They ate, they slept, and they groomed themselves obsessively. Their fur was perfect because they never got into a single conflict. They moved through the enclosure as if no other mouse existed in it. Calhoun named them the beautiful ones. They looked like the healthiest mice in the entire colony. They were also, functionally, already gone. They never attempted to reproduce. They could not socialize. Their nervous systems had developed inside a world where every available role was already filled by someone else, and they had simply opted out of the species entirely. On day 560, the population peaked at 2,200 mice. It would never go higher. The last successful conception inside Universe 25 happened on day 920. After that, no new mice were born. The beautiful ones kept grooming themselves. The secluded females stayed in their high apartments. Violence continued in isolated pockets, with no purpose left to drive it. And one by one, the mice died of old age, with nothing coming up behind them. On May 23, 1973, the last mouse in Universe 25 died. 4 years and 10 months after Calhoun had closed the lid. He wrote that the mice had experienced 2 deaths. The first was the death of the spirit. The second was the death of the body. The first happened years before the second. When the paper was published, the world ran with the obvious conclusion. Comfort kills. Abundance kills. A life with no struggle destroys itself. The beautiful ones became one of the most cited images of the late 20th century. Politicians used them. Religious leaders used them. Urbanists used them. Anyone who wanted to warn about the decay of modern civilization found something in those mice they could point to. But that was not actually what Calhoun concluded. His real finding was sitting there, in his own words, in the paper itself. For an animal as complex as a human being, he wrote, a similar collapse was not just possible, it was logical. But the cause was not comfort. The cause was the disappearance of meaningful roles. When the population grew faster than the number of roles the colony could offer, the animals with no place to fill stopped functioning. The fighters had no one left to protect. The mothers defended nests with no support. The young grew up with nothing they were needed to do, and nothing they were expected to become. The structure that gave each individual mouse a reason to participate in the species simply evaporated. The food never ran out. The water never ran out. What ran out was something Calhoun had not thought to put into the paradise at the beginning. Meaning. Purpose. A reason to be here that was connected to something outside yourself. Comfort did not kill them. It just removed the friction that had made being alive feel like something worth doing. And here is the part that almost nobody quotes. Calhoun himself was not a pessimist. He spent the rest of his career not predicting collapse, but trying to prevent it. He kept building new experiments. He kept adjusting the variables. He was looking for the one thing he could add back into a paradise that would let it keep functioning. He believed it could be done. He believed humans could choose differently than the mice had. He wrote that as physical space contracts, the only path forward is to expand into conceptual space, into ideas, into new networks, into the work of building roles that have never existed before. He called it ideational generativity, a long phrase for a simple idea. The way out is to keep making new reasons to be here. The mice had no choice about what Universe 25 was. They could not redesign the enclosure. They could not create new roles out of nothing. They were given a paradise, and they consumed it until it consumed them back. We still have a choice. The experiment is still sitting there in the data. 8 mice, a perfect world, a complete extinction, and a cause of death that no medical report could ever name. The only question it leaves open is what we decide to do with the roles we still have left to fill.